She was already in the kitchen when I walked in barefoot, the hem of her robe brushing just above her knees, steam rising from the kettle behind her like smoke from some quiet spell. I froze in the doorway. She turned slowly, mug in hand, and met my eyes with that same look she'd given me the day before, curious, unreadable, something just behind it waiting to be named. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice low and scratchy with sleep. I nodded, said nothing. She poured tea without breaking eye contact. "It's stronger at night," she said. The quiet. She wasn't just talking about the house. "My name's Ethan. I'm 26. I work in design, mostly freelance gigs that blend motion graphics and UI elements, and I rent the top floor of an old Victorian house on the quieter edge of town, just a block from the park, 3 from the bakery, and 6 from nowhere special. The kind of place people pass through, not settle in. Which suits me fine. I've never needed much noise to feel alive, just a clean room, strong coffee, and a bit of light through the window. The landlord lives downstairs. Her name's Miranda. She's 43. I learned that later, of course. At first, all I knew was that she had a presence, the kind that fills a room even when she's not speaking. She was graceful in the way you don't often see anymore. Everything about her was quiet, elegant, but sharp, like she could read you before you even spoke. The first time I met her, she handed me the keys and apologized for the creak in the hallway stairs. "The bones of the house are old," she said, "but they remember." I thought about that sentence more than I probably should have. She didn't hover. She wasn't nosy. But I'd see her sometimes on the porch watering the plants, or in the shared backyard, clipping herbs from the small garden she kept with meticulous care. And we'd nod, sometimes say hello, sometimes not. For the first few weeks, she was just the woman who lived below me. But then something shifted. Not all at once, slowly. The kind of shift you only recognize in hindsight. It started with a dinner. There was a knock on my door one Sunday night around 7. When I opened it, Miranda was standing there with a small ceramic dish in her hands. "Brought you something," she said, holding it out. "Don't ask me to pronounce it. I just cook." The dish was warm through the cloth she'd wrapped it in, and it smelled like rosemary and lemon and something deeper, something familiar I couldn't name. "Thanks," I said, a little too surprised to sound smooth. "You didn't have to." She smiled, just a little. "I know. It would have been easy to close the door then. Thank her, maybe compliment the food later. But I didn't. Something in her tone, and the pause she left open, made me hesitate. "You want to come in for a bit?" I asked, unsure if I was overstepping. She studied me for a second. Not suspicious, just assessing, like she was weighing the question in her mind. Then she stepped past the threshold like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't stay long. 20 minutes, maybe. We ate off paper plates and talked about nothing. The weather, the street noise, the bakery's ridiculous prices. But there was a rhythm to it, easy and unforced. She was warm, self-contained, but not closed off. When she left, she touched my arm gently, just once. A small thank you. The kind of gesture you don't usually remember, but I did. After that, I started noticing more. The way her laughter lingered in the hall after a phone call. The faint jazz music that drifted from her kitchen some nights. The scent of cloves and citrus she always carried with her. I didn't say anything. I didn't even let myself think it, not fully. But I started listening for her footsteps. I started caring which nights the porch light stayed on. And that was before the storm, before the night the power went out, and she knocked on my door not with food, but with a candle in one hand and 2 mugs of tea in the other. "Figured you wouldn't mind the company," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. The storm had been creeping all afternoon, the kind that doesn't crash in all at once, but curls in slow like a tide. By dusk, the sky was already bruised, swollen with clouds, and the wind carried a kind of warning. The lights went out just after 8. Everything blinked, then dimmed, then silenced. I'd lit one candle. That was it. I was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, watching the flicker dance across the hardwood when there was a soft knock at my door. Miranda stood there barefoot, wrapped in a knit cardigan that hung low on her arms. Her hair was loose, damp at the ends like she'd showered just before the power cut. She held a candle in one hand, 2 mugs of something warm in the other. "Chamomile and honey," she said, raising one of them slightly. "Figured you didn't strike me as the bourbon on a blackout night type." I let out a quiet laugh and stepped aside. "You figured right." She sat on the edge of the armchair near the window. Rain traced the glass in long, slow lines. The house, the street, the entire block, all of it swallowed by the dark. I always forget how quiet everything gets without electricity, she said. Like the world exhales. We didn't talk for a bit after that. The candle cast long shadows up the wall. Her face was soft in the low light. Not made up or guarded. Just her. Real. Tired, maybe. But calm. You live alone long? She asked suddenly. Her eyes not on me, but on the steam rising from her mug. Yeah. Since I was 19, off and on. She nodded. It teaches you things. Like what? She looked at me now. Like how to be content with silence. Or how to recognize the exact moment the air in a room changes. Her eyes held mine just a second too long. I felt it. That moment. The change. It was subtle. No music swell. No shiver of revelation. Just something unspoken pressing at the edges. Did it just change? I asked, before I could think better of it. She didn't look away. Maybe. I sat down across from her, on the floor again, closer this time. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. What do you think people see when they look at you? She tilted her head slightly, caught off guard, maybe, but not offended. I think most of them see what they expect to. A divorced woman. A homeowner. Someone who drinks herbal tea and trims rosemary in the mornings. And that's not you. Her lips twitched. It's part of me, but not all. People forget you can be many things. That you don't stop changing just because you turn 40. There was weight in her voice, not bitterness, just a tired kind of truth. What do you see when you look at me? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang there. My mind wanted to keep it safe. Surface level. But I didn't lie. I see someone who walks through her own house like she's always listening for something. She blinked. That's the precise thing to notice. I'm not always good with people, I admitted. But I'm good with quiet. I pay attention. She set her mug down on the windowsill. And do you ever wonder what you're hoping to hear? All the time. The room held still again. I could hear the rain more clearly now. Not pounding, just steady. The kind of sound that sinks into you. I haven't had a real conversation like this in months, she said quietly. Not one that didn't orbit around bills or repairs or emails from my sister. You deserve more than orbit, I said. You deserve someone to just be still with. Her eyes flicked down, then back to me. She smiled, soft but full of something I couldn't name. Be careful, she said. That kind of honesty, it gets remembered. The candle had almost burned out. She rose, slowly, as if reluctant to break whatever spell we'd stepped into. At the door, she turned back. I'm glad you invited me in, she said. I'm glad you knocked. And then she was gone. Her steps light down the stairs, the door clicking shut behind her like a held breath. I didn't sleep much that night. The storm passed. The power returned. But the quiet stayed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to fill it. After that night, something between us shifted. It wasn't sudden or obvious. Nothing so dramatic. But I started to notice the patterns changing. The shape of her footsteps on the stairs, the rhythm of her knock when she came by with rent receipts or garden herbs. I started seeing her outside more often, not because she wasn't busy, but because I was watching for her now. And sometimes she lingered, just long enough to suggest she was watching for me too. One Wednesday, I came home late from a client meeting. The sun was low, that golden stretch of evening where shadows go soft and the whole world feels like it's exhaling. She was on the porch, seated on the swing, her knees pulled close beneath her dress, reading something with the kind of focus that makes you jealous of a book. I nearly walked past. Didn't want to interrupt. But she looked up just as I reached the gate. You ever read poetry? She asked, holding up a slim volume. Only when I'm trying to impress someone, I said, smiling. Her eyes held mine for a second longer than usual. You don't have to impress me, Ethan. I already like the way you look at the world. She didn't invite me to sit. She didn't need to. I climbed the porch steps and lowered myself onto the swing beside her. The silence settled around us like a blanket, not cold, not empty, just present. She handed me the book without a word, flipping it open to a marked page. I read the lines under her thumb. They were simple, sharp, full of space between the words. I didn't say anything when I finished. Just closed the book slowly and handed it back. That one always gets me, she said. Something about the way it names loneliness without apologizing for it. I nodded. Like it's just another kind of weather. Her smile was soft. Exactly. We didn't talk about big things that night. Nothing about her past or mine. We spoke in fragments, favorite coffees, the way early September light hits the sidewalk, the kind of music you only listen to when you're sure no one's watching. At one point, our hands brushed as I passed her the book again. Neither of us pulled away. The next morning, she left a basket by my door. Fresh bread wrapped in a cloth napkin, still warm. No note, no explanation, just a gesture, quiet and full of intention. I brought it down later that day, returned the basket clean, thanked her. She was in the garden, sleeves rolled up, dirt smudged along one cheek. I didn't mention the bread. She didn't mention the swing. But when I offered to help weed the rosemary patch, she nodded and scooted over to make space. We worked in silence for a while. The heat of the day had passed, and everything smelled of earth and citrus. Every now and then, our hands would meet in the soil with gloved fingers bumping. We never looked up when it happened, but neither of us moved away too quickly either. Eventually, she sat back, brushing her hands on her knees. "You know what I miss?" she said, half to the sky. Real conversation. Not performative, not functional. Just two people showing up for each other. I looked at her. She wasn't asking anything of me, just sharing a truth. "I think about you when I walk past your door," I said. "Not always, but enough that I notice." She nodded slowly, like she understood. Not flattered, not surprised. Just seen. Later, as the sun dipped low again, she stood and offered her hand to pull me up from the grass. When I took it, she didn't let go right away. We stood like that, barely touching, the silence full of everything we hadn't said yet. Not sexual, not even romantic, just impossibly intimate. And then she let go, nodded once, and said, "Don't forget to water the basil. It droops when ignored." That night, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, her voice still in my head. I thought about hands and soil, about poetry that didn't apologize for loneliness. And I realized this wasn't passing. This wasn't a phase. It was something else, something blooming. The first cool days of October came like a whisper, not a shift, but a suggestion. The mornings grew softer, the light thinner. I started waking earlier without knowing why. She was outside again that week, standing by the fence in a long gray coat, a mug in her hand. I watched her through my window longer than I meant to. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and chose not to say anything. The tension between us was no longer subtle. It had shape now. Wait, it wasn't in the things we said, but in the spaces we left between sentences, in the way her hand would pause just slightly too long on my shoulder when she passed behind me, or how I found myself brushing my teeth slower, listening for the creak of her stairs. One evening, we sat on her back steps while the wind toyed with the laundry line. I'd helped her carry a few things down from the attic. Old boxes of winter coats, scarves, forgotten notebooks. She made coffee after, and we ended up there side by side, our shoulders almost touching. "Sometimes I think about moving," she said suddenly. "Selling this place. Starting over somewhere quiet, with no history." I didn't know what to say. The thought of her not being downstairs, not existing in the background of my days felt wrong. "Would you really leave?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. It's just a thought. Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." The words came out too quickly. I didn't even look at her after I said them. Just watched the trees in the neighbor's yard shift against the sky. "I didn't mean to make this complicated," she said, her voice soft. "You didn't," I replied. "It already was." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I forgot what it feels like to be noticed." Really noticed. Not complimented or flirted with. Just seen. "You're seen," I told her. "More than you know." She reached over then, not to touch, but to take my mug, her fingers brushing mine. And again, neither of us moved away. Later, as I stood to leave, she asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. It was almost dark. The house behind her was warm with light. I should have said no. I should have stepped back. But instead, I followed her inside. We didn't talk much over the meal. It wasn't about the food. It was the intimacy of the moment. Two people eating quietly, sharing space. Halfway through, her hand rested on the table, open, relaxed. I set my fingers next to hers. Not holding, just touching. Skin to skin, soft and unassuming. Her thumb moved once, brushing lightly over the side of my finger. That was all. And still, it felt like the loudest thing in the room. We didn't speak of it after. She cleared the dishes. I dried them. And when I stepped back into the hallway, she walked with me to the door. At the threshold, she didn't step away. "I think about you, too," she said quietly. Then she shut the door before I could say anything back. Not because she was uncertain, but because the moment had been enough. Back upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my coat, heart thudding slow and full. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fantasy. It was happening, and it was fragile. Whatever we were building, it was delicate as a breath on glass, and neither of us dared speak too loudly, afraid the whole thing might vanish if we named it too soon. The following days were full of almosts. Almost touching when we passed in the hallway. Almost saying more when our eyes met over a shared cup of tea. Almost admitting something each time we lingered just a second too long in the same room. It was like living at the edge of a cliff and pretending not to notice the drop. One night, I came home late. Cold air clung to my coat, and my hands ached from hours of laptop work in the Too Bright cafe downtown. As I stepped through the front door, I saw her light still on below. Something in me hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because I knew. If I knocked, something might change. Something might slip. I knocked anyway. She answered in a cardigan and jeans, glasses perched low on her nose. The smell of vanilla and something baked clung to the hallway. She looked surprised, but not unhappy. "I brought you something," I said, holding up the pastry box I'd picked up on impulse. "Figured you might be up." She stepped aside without a word, motioning me in. There was jazz playing low in the background, the kind that feels like it should come with a warning about intimacy. We ate the pastry in the kitchen, late-night quiet wrapping around us like a coat. She poured tea, and we stood by the counter, our elbows brushing each time we moved. Everything felt closer than it should. "Can I ask you something?" I said, breaking the quiet. Her eyes flicked to mine. "Of course. Are you scared of what this could become?" She didn't answer right away, just looked down at her tea, then back at me. "No," she said finally. "I'm scared of what it's already becoming." She set the mug down with care, like even small sounds mattered now. "I've lived most of my adult life trying not to cross invisible lines. But you make me forget where they are." I stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that her breath brushed my collar. "You make me forget too," I said. There was a pause, one of those fragile, stretching silences, the kind that begs to be broken and dares you not to. She turned, slowly, until we were face to face. Her hand hovered for a moment before brushing the edge of my sleeve. "I don't know how to do this," she said, voice low. "We don't have to know," I told her. "We just have to mean it." A slow, aching breath left her lips. She nodded. Once. But we didn't touch. We didn't kiss. We just stood there, impossibly close, our restraint louder than any confession. When I left that night, she followed me to the door again. And this time, before I stepped into the hallway, she whispered, "Tell me something honest." I turned to her, heart pounding. "I think I'm falling for you." She didn't flinch, didn't smile, just reached out and brushed her fingers across my chest, lightly, like she needed to believe I was real. Then she closed the door without another word. That night, I lay awake for hours, the echo of her touch still warm against my shirt. Whatever this was, it had outgrown silence. It filled me now, thick and unshakable. And I knew, when the moment came, it would break through us both. Quietly, completely. It happened on a Sunday, the kind that creeps in unnoticed, soft with overcast light and no particular plans. I woke early for no reason and spent the morning pacing my apartment, doing nothing with great intent. The world outside felt suspended, like it had been holding its breath for us. She texted me just after noon. "I have something I need help with. If you're not too busy." No punctuation, no emojis, just plain words. That was her way when it mattered. I went downstairs, heart already louder than it should have been. She answered the door in a long sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, no makeup, her real face. Her true self. There was no something she needed help with. "Not really. I wanted to see you," she admitted, stepping back to let me in. But I didn't know how to say it without making it sound like more than it is. "What if it is more?" I asked. She didn't answer, just walked into the kitchen, started making tea like it was an ordinary afternoon. We didn't talk much. We moved around each other like a dance we'd choreographed in secret, silent, careful, full of knowing. And when she handed me the mug, our fingers touched. She didn't pull away. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about how this ends." I looked at her. "Why does it have to end?" Her eyes searched mine. "Because it can't last." "Then let's not ask it to," I said. "Let's just let it be what it is." She stared at me for a long time, then gave the smallest nod. We ended up in the living room. No music, no tea, just the two of us, the soft weight of 100 nearly crossed lines pressing in around us. I reached out first, not impulsively, not with any hunger, just the lightest touch, my hand brushing her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw like I'd imagined 100 times but never dared before. She leaned into it, eyes closing slowly, like the moment had finally become safe enough to enter. "You feel so young sometimes," she said. "And then you say things that make me forget how old I am." "You're not old," I whispered. "You're just real." That scares people. She opened her eyes then, and there was something there I'd never seen in her before. Not exactly fear, not exactly desire, just honesty. When she kissed me, it was like breathing for the first time. Not a fire, not a tremble, just warmth, steady and full. A kind of recognition. Her hand slid gently to my face, mine to her waist. And in that still room, with no music and no witness, we let go of the weight we'd been carrying in silence for weeks. We didn't sleep together that night. We didn't rush anything. We lay on the couch, her head on my shoulder, her fingers tracing idle circles against my palm. It was more intimate than anything I'd ever known. She told me about her first heartbreak. I told her about my father's silence. We cried, quietly, at different moments, not because we were sad, but because everything inside us finally had somewhere to go. When morning came, she kissed me once more, then whispered, "You'll leave, eventually. You'll go on with your life. That's how it's supposed to work." I held her hand. "Maybe, but I'll carry this." She smiled, and for once, it wasn't bittersweet. It was just full of everything we didn't have to hide anymore. I did leave that afternoon. Not forever, just for now. But we both knew something had ended, and something else had begun. Not a relationship, not a secret, just a truth. And in that quiet, where we had once only glanced and guessed, we finally existed fully. Not as fantasy, not as mistake, but as two people who dared to see each other completely, even if only for a little while.